Samus is the main character of the Metroid series, but what if in her first game she had been joined by two other video game heroines? I'm going to study the sprite masters at Nintendo so that I can learn Metroid style. And then I'm going to take what I learned to design Powersuits for two other characters, Shantae from the Shantae games and Ramona Flowers from the Scott Pilgrim series. The question is, can I design Powersuits that actually represent these characters within and don't just look like Samus knockoffs? Let's find out. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Robinson of Robinson Pixels. Let's start with a style study. The first Metroid game is true 8-bit. Now what that means is that there's only 3 colors per sprite, plus 1 for transparency. The game used solid black backgrounds in every room. This helped create a feeling of isolation, but it also gave Samus a black outline without adding to the color count. That was actually a genius move. Before even thinking about designing the Powersuits, I would need to design the characters themselves. For reference, we'll start with suitless Samus. Proportionally, she's pretty realistic, unlike our other heroes. First, I drew the characters so that I could understand their anatomy. We already have some defining features here. Shantae's elf-like ears, Ramona's goggles, but the physical characteristics of these characters only tells part of the story. We really want to work their personality into the Powersuits, so it's time for a vibe check. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they dress, so let's play dress up. Shantae is a belly dancer and dresses in harem pants, which are also sometimes called genie pants. This really works for her since she's a half genie. But I like the way they flare out, and they really push that element in some versions of her design. For Ramona Flowers, I was using her game sprite as inspiration. It was easy enough to add her jacket and socks. The biggest problem was that color scheme, because making her hair and the jacket greenish was making her skin also look greenish. Now once I recolored her hair to pink, it worked way better. Plus her character dyes her hair all the time, so this is fine. I added in her bag, which is actually a subspace suitcase. She's a delivery person, either for Amazon or Netflix, depending on your source, and she uses her magic little bag to carry her deliveries, plus weapons and even sometimes people. Now I think this is a good Ramona, but Shantae is still a little bit off. She's normally a bubbly character, so I sketched out a figure where she's doing a little dance. The important part was making sure her hair looks fluid. In the games, she actually uses her hair to attack by whipping it around. If you haven't played these games, they're super fun, they're so silly. It's time to design the Powersuits, beginning with concept art. I started out just by studying Samus. The armor is fairly complicated with lots of little details. I also spent a lot of time studying other Powersuits from the games, including some of the other characters. Most have helmets with their faces covered. Usually they've got shoulder pads, and the armor is typically bulky, sometimes very bulky. Now once I was satisfied, I copied the outline and started modifying for Shantae. I thought maybe she'd have a shield at first, but that doesn't stick. For her helmet, I didn't want her to look too military, so I went with a glass dome. And then I realized that since she usually attacks with her hair, it'd be funny if she had a cannon on top. I also extended her earpieces so they look more elf-like. I worked in the giant bracelets she wears in some games and shoes that curve upward. I also redid the boot cups a few times. The goal was to create boots that flare out at the bottom like her pants. It's impractical, but it's fun. The last major change is on the cannon. It was too basic. But what's not too basic is a friggin' genie lamp. I drew a profile view of her whole helmet so I could understand how this thing would work as a lamp. I wanted it to look like a lamp, but also sci-fi, and to also have a neck support thing in case the cannon recoils. You know, safety first. Colorize. I did not want to go with red because I wanted a visual contrast from casual clothes to the suit. Now for Ramona, the goggles were a must. Characters in the original comic style had very thick legs, so I gave her very thick boots. That also helps her to look more like the tank of the team. She also usually does her deliveries in rollerblades, so I took that tank idea and I really ran with it. Or rolled with it. I thought it'd be a cute touch to not mess with the design of her subspace suitcase. I thought it'd be funny to have her roll around like a tank with her little bag hanging off her hip. After a few more color adjustments, we've got our team. It's pixel time! I imported the Shantae design into Pixaki. Now lots of times I'll trace my sketches, but this time I didn't really draw it to scale, so I'd have to do it from scratch. First was just getting some pixels on the screen and blobbing it out. There's not a lot of room here, so you do have to make sacrifices. Now once I had the basic gist on screen, it still needs a lot of work. her proportions are off. Her armor is too thick and stubby, and honestly it makes her look like a Mega Man character. So I focused on shrinking down the armor. After all, she's supposed to be the smallest of the group. I cut her arms down to just 1 pixel thick, which also helps emphasize the size of her gauntlets. And yeah, now this looks like Shantae in Metroid style. Cool. But before we move on to Ramona Flowers, let's actually make it real and give Shantae an attack. I started out with a stick person and hunched her forward. It's always important to push poses as far as you can so they don't look stiff. I did bring in an example Shantae sprite to make sure I was getting that vibe right, but obviously it would be slightly different since this is a different style. One important thing I'll mention is that when you're changing the angle of a character, they have to remain mostly consistent. In this case, I was most concerned with the helmet, so I used the grid line feature to make sure all the main elements of the mask lined up between the different angles. After some more fiddling, I was satisfied. Now for Ramona Flowers' Powersuits. With this being the tank of the team, it was fun to just draw in big bulky blobs. I had really pushed those shoulder pads in the design stage because giant shoulders are a staple of the Metroid series. The sprite for this one came together much more quickly than I expected. I think it's because she's so much larger, it was easier to fit in the details without quite as many sacrifices. And of course I gave her the subspace bag because I just think that's so funny. Now for her next sprite, I really wanted to shake things up a little. I normally make my characters kind of standing solid flat on the ground or attacking solid flat on the ground. I don't do them airborne, so obviously the character who is the big bulky tank is the one I decided should be flying through the air with a hammer. I started actually just with the shoulder pad and head because I was really afraid they wouldn't work from a side angle, but I figured her head would move forward with the hammer's momentum, and that made it work. I drew in a stick figure, and guys, I cannot stress enough the importance of sticks and blobs. It really helps guide the process as you add in the real details. Ramona's hammer is normally realistic, just cartoonishly big. I wanted it to be techy, glowing with some sort of future energy. That was easy enough. What was not so easy was the slash trail. At first I just started drawing it in like a lightsaber, but it felt inauthentic. I checked out some other NES games that actually have swords, and yeah, big trails like this were not common at the time. Ninja Gaiden doesn't even have a slash. Luke Skywalker does, barely. It's like it's fading out as it's moving. I can work with that. I broke up that trail a little, added in some staticky crackles, and that got the job done. It's time for the reveal. Allow me to present to you Metroid Subspace Jin. And that's it! I think it's a very good practice to learn from the professionals, so if you want to see another Sprite Master study, be sure to check out my one on the Mega Man series, and let me know if you have some other series that you'd like to see. I've already gotten a few requests that I am working on, and be sure to follow along for more pixel practice. I also extended her earpieces so they look more elf-like,